Hello, happy Monday. Welcome to lesson 4.3. This week we're going to focus on Lincoln and the Civil War. We'll talk a little bit about as well, sort of the period where the actual fighting is happening. Um, Hold on, there we go. Here's the unit plan. I haven't changed it since last time you saw it, which for some of you was like 3 days ago. Last 2 weeks, we talked about the lead up to the war. This week, as I said, Lincoln and the Civil War, Thanksgiving after that, and then 2 weeks talking about Reconstruction. So the rebuilding of America after the war, the rebuilding of the South after the war, and also sort of the big question of like, what do you do with the 4 million people who were slaves and are now free? Where do they go? How do we find jobs? Um, that sort of thing. So we'll dig into that. Then we'll do an assessment and then winter break after that. So just before we get started, some different ways that you'll hear the two different Civil War groups discussed. So the states that don't rebel, generally the North, the Union, also maybe the US or the non-rebelling states. States that do rebel, South, the Confederacy, the Confederate States of America, that was their like official title for themselves, or the rebelling states. I just want to note that we're going to shift away once the fighting starts from pro-slavery and anti-slavery when describing the states. This is just because not all pro-slavery states rebel during the Civil War. I'll show you on a map in a couple slides, but there are a few states that still have slavery that stay sort of in this group, the North, the Union group. I will also say, just for the sake of conversation, when you hear it, I tend to prefer the rebelling states and the non-rebelling states. I think the reason why will become clear once we're in class, but just so you know what to look for, if you're going to get anything out of this slide, that'll probably help you understand what I'm talking about the most. So we start the Civil War with the election of 1860. So Abraham Lincoln is going to become the president. I don't think that that's new information for most of you. Abraham Lincoln is not on the ballot in 10 states. So being a part of the anti-slavery party, and just looking at this map, you could maybe guess which states he's not on the ballot in. Despite that, he wins about 40% of the vote. He wins the Electoral College by 101 votes, which is a lot. Between the election in November of 1860 and when Lincoln begins his presidency in March of 1861, 7 states are going to secede. So similar to how like Joe Biden is the president-elect sort of right now, but he doesn't become president until January. This is what we're talking about, this period of Lincoln being the president-elect. So we know he will be the president, but he hasn't started the job yet. This slide, you've seen a lot of this information on. The point I'm trying to get to with all of this, just so you sort of know, is like the South is getting a lot of what they want over and over again. They're winning elections. Just want to highlight that like the moment the anti-slavery party wins the presidential election, 7 states are gone, leave the country. Eventually, 11 states are going to leave. They're going to form what they call the Confederate States of America. I'm not going to ask you who these states are. I'm not going to ask you to like tell me what states are free and what states are slave states, what states are the North, what states are the South. It's just here if this helps you. South Carolina was first. These are the states that leave before Lincoln takes office, and then 4 more are going to end up leaving after. So the Confederacy. First state that leaves is South Carolina. This is December, so a month or so after the election. I want to just kind of highlight this idea here. So a geographical line has been drawn, according to South Carolina, across the Union. All of the states north of that line have united in the election of a man to the high office of president, whose opinions and purposes are hostile to slavery. I'll highlight a couple things here. Just he wasn't the actual president yet. So this isn't like, oh, they're passing anti-slavery laws and now we're mad. It's just the idea that he could um, is enough for them to say it's not worth it. Um, that's sort of the big thing I want to get to there. I'll also mention like there's a lot of conversations about what started the Civil War, what the causes were, and there's a lot of sort of valid interpretations of that, whether it's states' rights or slavery or economics or um, just social differences. I'll just point out that they say, at least as one reason, in their order of secession, they very specifically point to slavery being an issue. Um, could there have been others? Were there others? For sure, but slavery was there. Other thing that's important here is like the North doesn't like just let them leave. This is not a divorce where like you go to a lawyer and you sign some paperwork. There's not really any way that secession happens. You just declare that you're leaving and hope for the best. Um, the North doesn't really just say like, okay, good luck, South Carolina. Okay, good luck, Confederate States of America. Obviously, we go to war, but um, there's some discrepancy, which we'll talk about like whether or not the South is still part of the United States at this time. Specifically, whether or not they're subject to laws of the United States at this time. And then just before I move on, here's our border states. I said I'd mention them from a couple slides ago. So these are the slavery states that do not secede, that stay as part of the North, that do not rebel. Civil War starts April of 1861 in South Carolina. Just all you need to know about the war at this point is the North has most of the advantages. So a lot more people, 22 million versus 9 million. Also of that 9 million, 3.5 million of them are slaves. 90% of all goods in America are made in the North, and the North has twice as many miles of railroads. So getting soldiers around or goods around or whatever around the North has an advantage here as well. South does have better military leaders, but the North has the upper hand for a lot of this war. Civil War ends 4 years later. The month is subject to debate. So there's a like day that the paperwork was signed, the truce was signed, the war was over. Fighting happened for a few more months after that. So either of those dates are fine. So as far as the war goes, more than 1 million people die. That's more than American deaths in every other war we've ever fought combined. If it helps to sort of picture what that is, that's like currently roughly the entire population of Massachusetts or Arizona. So a lot of people. Also at the end, the South is broke. So as we're going to shift into Reconstruction after this week, or I guess after your week off, the South having no money is going to be something that factors into this. And also just the thing that made them wealthy, slavery was gone. So when we talk about like rebuilding the South, this is going to be sort of a big factor. They can't just like reopen the plantations or reopen whatever to make that money back. And that's going to lead to some tensions in Reconstruction. Last thing I just want to sort of plant in your minds going into the week is this idea of whether or not Lincoln freed the slaves. So we've got the two sort of big anti-slavery things that happened during the Civil War. So while the war is actually being fought, the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment. So the Emancipation Proclamation, I'll just say, says all persons held as slaves within any state in rebellion against the United States is free. So this doesn't count for those like 500,000 people in the border states. So he doesn't end slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation. Also, like, kind of doesn't count for the South. This gets back into the like, is the South part of the United States? Like he says, like, okay, all these slaves are free, but the South is like, well, we're not part of your country anymore, so we don't abide by your rules anymore. So like, we don't care. So like in practice, this basically doesn't free any slaves. A few, which we'll talk about, but pretty much none. And then the 13th Amendment, the same thing. So the 13th Amendment is the one that actually ends slavery. With this biggest exception that people don't talk about too much, has nothing to do with our class, but if you want to note that it ends slavery except as punishment for a crime. So like prison systems. Um, so it ends slavery. But again, the South doesn't consider themselves part of the United States. So when the 13th Amendment says, place subject to the United States jurisdiction, excuse me, subject to the United States control, the South is like, well, that's not us. We're a different country. So this doesn't apply to us. That's it. We'll dive into some of these ideas in class today, but that's all I've got for you. And I will see you during class.